In the beginning, God created. Then he created man in his own image. Then man created. Those who know him then are creative Christians.
Let's meet one of them now.
You're looking good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, for those of you listening, let me go ahead and read your introduction here, and I better read it or I'm going to leave something out. Such a big list here. Jerry B. Jenkins, who we're now looking at right now, is an American writer, and I'm going to add to it a Christian administrator. He is best known for the Left Behind series, written for Tim Mahay, that sold over 63 million copies. And there were 16 books in that series, which that gives about 4 million copies apiece. And that is far from the only thing he's done. He's written over 200 books in many genres. For instance, the subject of his biographies include Billy Graham, Bill Gaither, Hank Aaron, Walter Payton, and Nolan Ryan. And others, he's written self-help books, mysteries, and both children and adult fiction. And this, to me, is one of the interesting things. He was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, where his mother led him to faith in the Lord. And that must have been quite a moment for not only you, but for your mother. Could you describe that a little bit, how that came about?
Yeah, Bill, I was 6 years old, and my two older brothers were at a father-son thing with my dad at church, and I was too young to go.
Yeah.
So I was riding the back of the couch like a cowboy, and it put me at eye level with that famous Warner Salmon painting of Jesus knocking at the door. And I asked my mother what that was all about, because I'd grown up in Sunday school and I didn't remember that story. And she said, well, that door is symbolic. It's symbolic of the door of your heart. And you'll notice there's no handle on that door. You have to open the door. Jesus won't open the door from the outside. But she led me to that verse in Revelation 3:20 about, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if any man hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him and he with me. And I've heard theologians, since then say that that's not a salvation verse per se, but it certainly was for me, because I wanted Jesus in my heart and in the door. And so I never looked back. And the irony of that whole story is, when I got married 15 years later, my wife said that her grandfather knew Warner Salmon and lived in the same building with him, and even consulted on some of those paintings. And so now today, I've it's a long story, but I have come into the possession of two originals of the Head of Christ, which is Warner Salmon's most famous painting.
Yeah, something like 500,000 have sold about, or 500 million or something.
Yeah, I think it's been reproduced 1 billion times. So it's just pretty spectacular.
Yeah. Oh, that's a neat story. Well, let me go on here. After graduating from high school, Jerry attended Moody Bible Institute, where he later served as managing editor of Movie Monthly and eventually became vice president of Moody's publishing division, then served as writer in residence. And that's really where I became familiar with you. I remember reading something where you had a 3-week hole in your schedule, and you decided to write the book Rekindled. And I was always fascinated by that, because I was writing and it took me so long to write something, and you could get something that is so beautiful in about 3 weeks. So I want to congratulate you on that. He also was vice president of the Moody's publishing division, then served as writer in residence. And again, that's where that story came from. Jerry was a member of the Moody Bible Institute Board of Trustees until a few years ago. and now serves on the board of Colorado Christian University, where he's also chair of the creative writing major. He is currently working to meet 3 book publishing deadlines. How's that going?
Well, it's going pretty well. For almost a half a century, I averaged 4 books a year, and then I started to slow down, which I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Not semi-retirement, but just a more leisurely pace.
Yeah.
But happen to have three book deadlines over the next 11 months or so, and I'm working on the 3rd book in the Chosen series, the TV series that my son created, and he lets me play too now. I get to write novels that accompany each season, so it's great fun.
Well, that's very cool. One of the things that I was thinking about, you became the managing editor of Moody Monthly and eventually the vice president of their publishing. From my calculations, you hit that milestone around when you were 34. And I'm wondering, what did Moody see in you that made them believe, and I believe rightly, that you could perform that job, which is a big job, a lot of responsibility?
Well, I write a lot of fiction. Maybe that influenced my resume when I sent it to him. I don't know, but I was actually 24 when I interviewed for the job as managing editor of Moody Monthly,
Really?
and I was kind of a brash young guy, and the director of Moody Monthly magazine asked me what I would do if I were managing editor. And I said, I kind of blurted out, I said, first thing I do is fire the art director. I think the magazine looks dated. It's got this huge circulation. It's very influential. I'd been a Moody student, so I fit in with their theology and all that. But I said, I think it really needs a fresh look. And I thought too, when, on my resume, I think I'd written 9 or 10 books at that time. So I think he was expecting somebody older. And when I came into his office and he saw, how young I was, I thought I saw a flash on his face, like, oh my goodness, this is just a kid. So I thought, well, maybe he'd forgive me for being that brash. But I remember going home that day and telling my wife, I don't think I'm going to get it. I think I was too forward, and I don't think he thought knew I was as young as I was. Yeah. Well, a few weeks later, he called and said, when can you start? And by then I had turned 25. So I guess I was.
You were right there, middle age almost.
Yeah, exactly.
So did you accomplish that in your mind at Moody?
Yeah, I did. Since they hired me and knowing that I wanted to get rid of the art director and change to a new one, I did that. And the magazine won awards that very first year. It won for most improved magazine and magazine of the year and that type of thing in the Evangelical Press Association. So we had a good run there. And I was young and maybe too young for the job, but I learned an awful lot and really enjoyed that. And then, within a few years, they moved me over to the book publishing side, Moody Press. And from there, I went on to become vice president for publishing.
Well, that's quite impressive to actually write 8 or 10 books by the time you're 24 or 25. Did you have any trouble getting them published, or did that go pretty nicely for you?
That's the one area, I teach writers online. I have about 2,000 online writing students at Jenkins.com, and they often complain about, how often they're rejected. And I'd love to have a story about saying that I was rejected dozens of times and finally broke through. But the fact is, I think I had an advantage having been in the newspaper and magazine business before I started writing books. And so I've never had a book rejected. And of course, by now I'm writing on contract and that type of thing. But I wish I could say that was a tough thing for me. Now I have been edited, and I've learned to work with editors, and I've gotten 250,000 cliches out of my system. And there've been books that have done much better than I expected them to, and others that have done worse than I expected them to. But getting published has not been an issue for me over the years.
Are you seeing that the publishing industry is changing over the years with the advent of new technologies and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it really has. And, a couple of different things, that are issues there. One, self-publishing is so easy today. I don't recommend it because I feel like, why should you pay to be printed? I mean, they'll print anything you pay them to print when you could get paid to be published, where they actually vet your stuff and edit you and, help make it what it should be. I do think self-publishing is a good last resort. If you can't get traditionally published and you still want to, and you have the money and you do your homework, make sure you're checking on reputable companies that won't just, charge the highest price and give you a shoddy product. But the other thing about publishing is when I started, this was back nearly 50 years ago. So, rainbows were black and white back then, and I was using a manual typewriter. And nowadays, we can move copy around and transmit manuscripts and do things so quickly. And the thing that I teach writers especially is when you have this ability to change things so easily, we tend to tweak and change, and we never know when we finally hit on the right one. And people get frustrated. And I say, look, what makes us authors is determining when you've stopped making your writing better and you're only making it different. When it feels that way to you, go back and read those previous versions, find the one that you would keep reading and trust your gut and go with it. You can still change a few things as you go on, but generally it's a matter of finding out which one really works for you, and hope that there's a lot of people out there like you and will agree with you.
Yeah, one of the things obviously, I thought it was actually a kick when you edited my copy that I sent you on your introduction, because it reads so much better. I mean, it really does. And you strike me as a man of precision. The fact that things happen at a certain time, or I have a 3-week window I can write a book in, and those kind of things. But you're also a very creative man. Do you find that you have any problem between being precise and being creative?
Yeah, it's actually a terrible issue, and I find that that's true of a lot of writers. We're creatives, and yet we're also perfectionists. A lot of us are also introverts, which I find interesting, but because speaking and meeting people is all part of the game. But what I do with that is I totally separate the rough draft writing from the revising. I take off my perfectionist cap and tell my inner critic to shut up, and I just get the story down when I'm doing rough draft writing. Now,
Yeah.
I'll see something and I'll go, that's not right, I should change it. But I say, if I stop and start trying to fix this now, I'll never get done. My perfectionism will come through, and it'll slow me to a crawl. So I just keep telling myself, you can do this tomorrow. And so the way I work, not a lot of people work this way, but the first thing I do every writing day is I do a heavy edit and rewrite of what I wrote the day before. And that's with my perfectionist cap on and my inner critic loud and clear. And I work on every word until I'm happy with it. Then that catapults me into that day's rough draft writing. So I take that cap off, tell the inner critic to shut up, and go back the other way. That works for me. Some people like to write several days before they do the revision. Some people like to write a whole draft before they revise it. The only reason I don't recommend that is that you could find something about a quarter of the way through that changes everything. And now you got to rewrite the whole rest of it. So I try to do it day by day. And so by the end of the first manuscript, I've written it, and then I've gone back and rewritten it. So I've got 2 drafts by the time I'm finished. And then I go back through one more time to make sure I've engaged the reader's senses and aimed for the heart and those things you might forget on the first pass through.
Yeah. I got to take one of your courses. I got to find out what I've been doing wrong all these years.
You'd be welcome.
I'm sorry.
You'd be welcome.
No, it's what I do is when I write, I kind of write as fast as I can and so forth. But right in the middle, I always end up finding something that I want to add, but I need to do some background on in order to make it a meaningful thing. And so that's where I fall apart. is when I do that.
Yeah, I find the same thing. And while I'm writing, I'll be thinking, I thought I did all my research for this book, but here's something I don't know and need to know. I can't stop then and research it because that, again, it slows down that creative
Yeah.
process. And the other problem with creatives is we think of new ideas for new books while we're writing. And I've learned to just jot a note, put it in a folder, and stay at the task. Otherwise, I'd never finish what I'm working on. But I think the key for research or for something you want to add, just add an asterisk or write yourself a note, keep writing, get that day's work done, and then go back and either add or do some research to move on.
Yeah. Now, to get to the Left Behind series, because I mean, that's everybody concentrates on that as far as your legacy is concerned. Did you do it that way when you were writing it, or did Tim have the steps you needed to go through, and these are the theologies you need to hit, and all this kind of stuff? I mean, how was that series fit into your creative juices and how they flow?
Well, he had a basic idea of an opening scene where a pilot is flirting with a flight attendant, and Tim had seen this happen on an airplane, and he was coming back from a prophecy conference, and he was thinking, just kind of ran through his mind. For one thing, he said he saw everybody on the plane reading novels, and he wrote nonfiction books. So he was thinking, I got to find somebody to write this in fiction form. But what if this pilot is married and his wife has been telling him about the rapture and he's poo-pooed it, and he's interested in this flight attendant, and the rapture happens right there on the plane and people disappear? Then he knows his wife was telling the truth, and when he gets home, he's going to find her missing. And that's all he had. That was basically the germ of the book. And the rest of it was on me. And so I had to invent characters. And now we had the 21 judgments that come from heaven over the 7 years of the tribulation and that type of thing after the rapture. So all that was sort of in place. I'm not a theologian or a scholar. I'm a storyteller. I happen to agree with his theology. I was raised in that tradition, and I did go to Bible school. So I knew, I know the Bible. But I really counted on him to keep me on track theologically and to explain things that I didn't understand. But I got the fun part. I got to write the story and really play with it. So, and I did write it that same way. I'd write one day, and the next day rewrite what I wrote the day before and move on.
Yeah. Do you think about writing and then just maybe writing your first draft and putting it away for a week and then bring it back? Or when I find out if I haven't looked at something for about a week, it looks fresher, and I just feel like I can make changes better on it.
Yeah, that
What's
works
your
for a
thought?
lot of people. Yeah, it works for a lot of people, and I recommend that. I mean, I think it's if it works for you. Some people, I have a colleague who actually puts his manuscript in the freezer. He says he likes to let it cool off, and he'll leave it there a couple of weeks, and then he says he looks at it with fresh eyes. I think I sort of intuitively look at it with fresh eyes each day. I'm not sure why I'm able to do that. There have been times when I'll finish, and one thing I do is I keep my deadlines sacred. So I never miss a deadline. I make sure that I hit that, because only about 1 in 100 writers actually does that. So that already separates you from 99% of the competition.
Yeah.
But if I finish early, I will let it sit and then look, and sometimes I'll catch things I might not have caught otherwise.
I look at your life, which is kind of one success after another. I mean, God has blessed you in some very unique ways, and put you in places that are fairly unique places, particularly to have such a series as Left Behind. How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I do feel blessed, and I don't want to sound falsely modest, but I think the reason I write so much is that I'm mono gifted. I don't sing or dance or preach. Writing is what I do. But I was never called to write, ironically. I was a sports writer as a teenager when I felt a call to full-time Christian service. And I thought I'd have to give up the writing and study for the pastorate or the missionary work.
Yeah.
And a counselor that night was very wise, and she told me, don't be too quick to give up the writing because it may be the vehicle that you use to fulfill this call, because God often equips us before he calls us. And so that gives me a whole new view of writing. But how I want to be remembered, this may sound funny coming from somebody who's had bestsellers and all kinds of success and visibility. But if I am remembered as a good husband, father, and grandfather, that's all I need.
Very good. Very good. I also, I look at your life, and then I look at, the life, say, of Dallas. And I know you have 3 sons. Is that right? Is that
Right.
is that right? Did I get that right? And it's almost like lightning is striking in the same place twice. And how do you account for that, or do you account for that, or is that any part of your thinking?
It is part of our thinking. My wife and I talk about this a lot. How could this possibly, Left Behind is a once in a lifetime thing. I mean, you
Yeah.
talk about lightning striking. It's a phenomenon that, most writers only dream about. And then and ironically, at the same age I was when Left Behind hit.
Really?
That's
I
the
didn't
age
realize that.
that
Yeah.
is now. And so I'm able to give him some advice that Dr. LaHaye gave me. Dr. LaHaye was about my parents' age, so there was a father-son dynamic there. And he said, let's let the phenomenon take care of itself. Let's just stick with what we're doing that got us here. And I'm able to say that to Dallas too, because, all that success and visibility can turn your head, but he's now in his mid-40s. And, I wish I could take credit for his success. Sometimes we watch him on some of these behind the scenes videos and watch him doing the directing. And we wonder, was he raised by wolves or who? We don't remember, being that good of parents. But obviously, we're very proud of him and just
I
thrilled to
bet
see
you
him.
are. I bet you are. As I told you, I'm part of a prison ministry, and one of the things I do is I just write short Christian books for the prisoners. And the actual chaplain who I work with, he shows an episode of The Chosen every Sunday. He gives his message and then shows the prisoners this phenomenal series. And I mean, it's so relatable. It's really beautiful in that regard. You're far from over in terms of what you're going to do. I mean, you now are working with writers, and like you say, you have about 2,000 online. Do you have a future that you're looking towards that you'd like to do, or do you want to just kind of coast until God puts you someplace? Or what's your thought on your future?
Well, I feel obligated to still exercise the one gift I've got. And people say, why do you still need to do this? Well, I never needed to do it. The only reason I did it was to fulfill that call. And I don't think that call ever ends. When you're called to full-time Christian service, I don't see retirement in the Bible. And, I'm not good at many other things. And as I say, I'm not trying to pretend to be modest. I mean, writing is it. And I don't know, my wife says she married me for better or for worse, but not for lunch. So I don't think she wants me to retire and hang around. So I think in fact, she said she's going to put on my tombstone, never an unpublished thought.
Does your wife have a Christian calling as well, other than being your wife, or does she work outside the home or anything?
She's never worked outside the home. She's a great mother and grandmother. She loves this stage of life. She is the healthiest grandma I've ever seen. She does yard work every day, walks every day, works out. She's got lots of hobbies, lots of things she likes to do, and we're actively involved in a small group at our church and are members of our church. So She's busy all the time. She's not terribly analytical. I think if I had a real analytical wife who critiqued my books, that might be threatening to me. She just reads them and loves them and tells me, she says, I don't know how you do it, but keep doing it. So I will.
Very cool. Very cool. You mentioned, just for my own edification, that your church has a prison ministry as well. That, pardon me, where you have an actual church there in the prison. How does that work?
It's pretty amazing. You hear of a lot of churches who minister in prisons. They come in every few weeks or every month and preach and talk to the guys. And I think that's great. It's a wonderful ministry. But our church decided, and I'm not sure who was behind this, but I think they had somebody on their pastoral staff who had actually been a prisoner and got saved in prison and became a pastor. But he was a chaplain in the Ark Valley Correctional Center here in Colorado. And somehow they got the idea of let's have, because I think we have 5 campuses throughout Colorado Springs, or 4, but the 5th one now is literally in Ark Valley Prison. So these guys aren't just visited every once in a while and talked to. They have a church and they have members and they have a campus pastor. It's one of the inmates. And in fact, in a few days, our pastor is going to go down there and preach. And when he goes, I like to go with him. And I often take my latest book and make sure I have a copy for everybody. And they're all watching The Chosen and they're reading the books and things like that. There's a prison ministry legacy in our family. I remember my father's oldest sister just felt called to prison ministry, and she would go into the prisons and pass out tracts and chat with the guys. And so there's something maybe in my DNA that's drawn to that. But I just love how our church does it. And these guys don't feel like they're just targets. They feel like they're members. I mean, and they give what they can, and they contribute where they can, and they're really growing. So it's a wonderful ministry.
That's fascinating. I'll have to ask whether there's any possibility of us doing it in California. I don't know if things are different, but I like that idea. I really do.
I've seen mentions in Christianity Today. I read about another church that has an actual campus in a prison, and it seems prisons would be open to that. I mean, they like anything that encourages the guys and makes them better people, and this certainly does that. Yeah, no,
and it also gets them. They're beginning to get their feedback and their sense of worth out of Christ.
That's right.
And and that can't help but improve their transition back into society. It just can't.
Right.
Just one last question. Zoom is telling me that we're running out of time here, but I mean, obviously there's a Left Behind series and there's a lot of other things. Is there a book that you've written that you really feel particularly proud of and feel that God really was working through you when you wrote it?
Yeah, there is. I have a favorite novel, and it's called Riven, Riven. And if you're familiar with that word, from the old hymn, his riven side. I just had an idea for a novel for years that I couldn't get to. I was involved in writing these series and stuff. And when I finally got the time to write it, it just sort of gushed from me. It's the longest book I've ever written. So even if you don't like it, it makes a good doorstop, but
I've got a few of those.
It's about a guy who commits a murder and winds up on death row. And it's also about a pastor who has had sort of failures in several small churches. He's no Billy Graham, people tell him, but he's so devout and he wants to share his faith. He winds up as a chaplain in the same prison and leads this man to Christ and teaches him to memorize scripture. And I won't give away the whole story, but the guy actually gets to choose his method of execution, and he chooses crucifixion, not because he's going to rise again or because he's going to atone for his sin, but so that people can see what Jesus literally went through on the cross.
Wow.
And so I've just always been partial to that book. It's not my bestseller, but it's the one that's my favorite of all that I've done.
Oh, I'm glad I asked that question. That's very good. Is there anything you'd like to say before we end this?
Well, I just appreciate, Bill, you having me on so much. It's been great to talk to you, and I hope it's been helpful to other people. And if people would like to try to learn to write, we have everything from free blogs and tips up to things you can pay for. But jerryjenkins.com is where to check us out.
Well, I want to wish you all the best. I really do. You've been a big part of my life, even though you probably never heard of me, and you've probably been a big part of a lot of people's lives. And I just want to congratulate you on remaining faithful to what you're doing, and wish you all the best and Godspeed as you continue to do it.
Well, thanks so
God
much.
bless you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Jerry's a great guy, and I truly appreciate the time he spent with us. Next week, we'll meet a guy who, when he was still a young adult, told a friend that he was getting bored with Christianity. The friend suggested that when God presented him with an opportunity, that he say yes to it. So that's what he did. And saying yes resulted in him publishing over 125 books, directing and producing about 20 films, and receiving over 70 national and international awards. Be with us next week to hear what this gentleman has to say. Until next time, be a creative Christian.